Black Gemara. Today's daf is daf Kuf Mem Beis. And basically, just to recap what we're up to, we had Rav Huna came along and said that Hamazakilu Uber Loikona. If somebody wants to give a gift or something to a child in a mother's womb, and he gives it to someone else and says, "I want you to acquire it," on that person's on that Uber's behalf. Hamazakilu Uber Loikona. Why? Because you are making a kinyan a lidavar shaloi b'loyim to someone that doesn't exist. Our Mishnah clearly said that if a person says, if my wife has a son, he'll get 100. If my wife has a daughter, she'll get 200. So it seems clearly kana. So Rabbi Huna said, I have no idea who the author of this Mishnah is because I don't know of anyone who agrees with that opinion. And we tried to bring different Tanaim and we couldn't work it out. So let's start again from the top of the page. We have a few opinions here. 2 lines from the top of 3 lines on the page. Rav Nachman, you have different opinions. Rav Nachman said, "Hamazake le-uber loikana." If you are mezake to an uber, that means that you give someone else a gift to say, "I want you to acquire it on behalf of the uber of this embryo." Loikana, that the uber is not kainit. But if you say likishateilet, if you say when this uber will be born, then kana it is kainit. What exactly is the logic in that? Is it because the way we explained yesterday already? It started while the uber was inside the mother's womb, but it doesn't get completed until this uber is born, or somehow or another, it's sort of nothing happened at all whilst the uber, but it's when the child is born, it has somewhere to be chal. That's when it becomes reality. We'll see a little deeper more later. Rav Huna says, not only while there's a stage of an uber, this child cannot acquire, this uber cannot acquire it, even when the uber is born, nothing happened. Why? Because at the time when you made it, it wasn't shy for anything to happen, so nothing happened. And once the kinyan disappeared, there's nothing for it to reinvent itself after the child is born. And Abshesh is diametrically opposed to Rav Huna and to Rav Nachman. He says, that even while it's in the mother's womb, it's kind of, if you said likishateilet, if you say when the child will be born, for sure it'll be kind of. I'll tell you a bigger chiddush. Even if you say while the child's in the mother's womb, that this child should acquire this, the child is kind of, and you cannot change your mind. How do I know this? It's a chiddush that an uber, a lid davar shalei b'olam is kind of. The time not the b'raisa. A ger who has no family, we already learned this a few times before. If a ger dies, has no family, all of his assets become hefker, ownerless. Anybody can come in, and we said no, potus agoda, and you're kind of. But you have to have intention to be kind of. So what happened? A ger died. Ubizbezu yisrael nechasa was a strong word to use. They plundered his assets. Vishamu, but then they heard sheyesh leben. He actually has a son, which means a son after he became a ger, which means that son is the rightful heir, and whatever they did, they basically were galavim. That's why, in a way, you probably use the word bizbasu, because it turns out to be that they were, at the time, they were mavazir, they were plundering. Oisha muberes, they heard that she was pregnant. So in other words, there's a child going to be. Now, muberes means there's only an uber here. Then chayovin lahachzir, they have to give it back. No, they ganovim, you got to give it back. What happened to Chazir HaKerl? They gave it back, or they put everything back, wherever they took. And then then they heard that true, the woman was pregnant, or true, there was a child, or child passed away. In fact, she miscarried. They have to go back again. The first chazak is meaningless, but the second one is plain. Nothing for second. In the case where there was a child alive, of course there was an owner here. What do you come in? I make a kinyan in your house when you went on a trip. Of course, it's nothing. But if there's an Uber, and if you tiny an Uber is not kind, so what the mother was pregnant? If the child was never born, then retrospectively, in favor respectively, then nothing happened, as if the child was non-existent. So why did you make a second kinyan? Why don't we just say that the first kinyan the chazak they made is valid? He never lost it. They never lost it. They walked away from it thinking that the mother is pregnant, she'll have a child. So they returned it. But then it turned out to be that the child was never born, which means there was only an Uber. And if you hold like Rav Nachman Abuna, Uber is not koine, so what's the problem? Why make a second kinyan? So Rav Sheish that to me that an Uber is koine, which means that even though the was never born, because inside the mother's womb, all the assets of the ger belong to the uber. So the first chazaka was meaningless. But then, when the uber was miscarried, you have to make a new chazaka. That proves that an uber is kind. Not retroactive at the time, yeah. These are not the did it once. That's the question he asked. Omar Abaye, Abaye says, and we already had the same word before, Yerusha haba meileh shayin. We said before you when we were talking about the difference of yesterday and difference tonight, we said there's a difference between you trying to make a new acquisition or when you're an heir. When you're an heir, it's a Yerusha haba meileh, the Eivishter says that you Yarshin, then an Uber can be kind of the father's assets. We're talking about Hamazakil Uber. It's not even the father, but he wants to give a gift. If my wife gives birth to a boy, I want to have $100. It's a gift. It's not a Yerusha. And because you want to create a new situation, you have to make a proper kinyan. There's no one to talk to. But when it comes to Yerusha Malek with Brokar Navu, it's an extension of the father, then it's automatic. Automatic, even Uber can happen. And that's the case over here. It's automatic. Different. That's a bias. Rava disagrees. Rava says there's no difference whether it's Habom Meleh or whether it's a gift. Uber is not kind. No. So what's the story with the gay? Shiny Hashem did a fuye marfiyim biyodayim mikar. Really, the Uber is not kind. But they heard a rumor that there was a child. So if they heard a rumor as a child, or even they didn't know, or at the time they made the chazaka, they didn't know. Is there a child? Isn't there a child? So when they made the chazaka, they didn't know 100% that this is going to become theirs. Because it turns out to be there's a child somewhere in the world, they get nothing. So their whole kinyan was very tenuous. It was very weak in their hands. And because the kinyan itself was not a strong kinyan, that's why the first chazaka wasn't good. In order to be kind, it's not just the maisa kinyan, you have to have the right intention to be kind. But they were wavering. They didn't know, is there a child out there? Isn't there a child out there? So that's why. So really, Rabbi argues about it. Rabbi says, I don't care, Yerusha, but the Rush came on its own, and now Uber is not kind. End of story. Uber is not kind. Here, because they didn't know for sure one way or another, their first kinyan wasn't really a kinyan. So that's why they have to do it again. So you want to at the end of the day, is there nafkamin al halacha whether you hold that Uber is kinyan because Yerusha habom meleh, or you tell me because it's weak? What's the difference? You guys, a big difference. What about Sheshamu by Shemes? When they made the kinyan the first time, they heard there was a child who died already. So when they went in, they thought that they can keep it. But turned out to be the child hasn't died yet. Maybe the child was sick, the child hasn't died yet. So when they made the first kinyan, in actual fact, there was a child out there. But they heard that the child died. The child didn't die. But and then it died. So according to a Abaye that says the problem is that an Uber is what holds them back from being kaina because the Uber itself is kaina. So it doesn't matter what you heard, what you thought. The fact of the matter is there was a child alive at the time when you made your first kinyan, so your kinyan was worthless. So you have to make a second kinyan. But according to Rav, who says that Uber has no bearing on it at all. Uber is not kaina. The only reason why you have to make a second kinyan is because you thought at the time there might be a child out there, so your kinyan itself wasn't done properly. But in this case here, you heard when you went in to make your first kinyan, you heard the child's dead already. That means you went in with 100% guns blazing, thinking that this is mine. You were so happy and thrilled. In that case, even though in reality the child is alive, so what? The child has no bearing. The Uber has the case of the Uber has no bearing. You made the kinyan thinking that there is no Uber, or you heard the Uber died. So your kinyan was 100% with the right intention. So you're kind of you don't have to make a second kinyan. Here's a big nafkamin halach. Okay, so we have now Rab Sheshes who holds echad zeh that even an Uber is kind of forget about if he said when you'll be born you'll be kind of even right now the Uber is kind of. Toshma coming here. It says in the Mishnah, Kindik ben yom echad, a child 1 day old, noichel manchil, a child 1 day old inherits from his mother. If his mother passed away before him, or his father, he becomes a Yerush. And manchil, if he dies, he passes on whatever Yerush is to others. The Gemara needs to ask already. Who cares? What's the difference if the child is manchil? Let's say the child is not manchil. There are two brothers and him. If the child is not manchul and the father later dies, the two brothers will divide the whole estate. If the child, because he's 1 day old, inherits and then dies, so whatever he inherited passes on to the brothers, so they end up with the same amount. So Mainav Kamin, the reason why the Yashin is because it goes through the brother, or the reason why the Yashin directly from the father. What's the point of manchil? What are we adding by manchil here? That's so the Gemara there asked the question, but here doesn't ask the question. But the way we learn here is going to be the same answer for the Gemara there, and we'll see. So it sounds from here clearly. When do we say that he can yashin, that he can be koine? Ben yemechad has to be alive. In uber life sounds like, but while the child's in the mother's womb, does not manchel. For example, the father dies before the child died. The child never made it into the world. The child then dies somewhere in the womb, a stillborn baby. Is that manchel? Clear, uber is not koine. Rav Shesha says no. We had before that if a child predeceases his father, he still yashins, and then he passes on to his children. But yes, Yerusha B'Kever, yes, Mishmush B'Kever. But we said when it comes to a mother's estate, if the child died before the father, the child still yashins for his children. But let's say he has no children, it does not get transferred to the brothers of a different mother. The same with the husband. We said before, the husband yashins his wife. But if the wife, after the wife died, her father passed away, now there's a big Yerusha, that does not go to the husband. A woman does not yashin behavior to outside of her family, not to the husband, and not to, let's say she yashin, she bequeaths to her child. But if the child has no children of his own, all he has is a single boy. He has brothers from a different mother. It doesn't go sideways. Then it goes back to her family. So that's what it means over here. When do we say that this child passes on to his brothers, even though this mother, only the child was alive? Only the child was alive. So if the child was alive, he yashined and his mother died. He yashined his mother, then he passed it on. He has to be alive. What's the difference between alive and not alive? Because the Gemara in Erchin says, this is a big Gemara. We'll learn the gates of abortions, all that kind of stuff. The Gemara in Erchin says that if there's a child, threatening the life of the mother, whatever it is, you find us, we'll always assume if the mother died while giving birth, and the baby was a stillborn baby, we always assume that the stillborn baby died first, before the mother. And why do you make that assumption? So the Gemara there says, because the Malach HaMavis has drops from his sword that comes down, and because the baby is not a full life yet, right? Just it hasn't come out to the world, and the mother has a full life, we'll assume that the baby succumbs before the mother does. There are exceptions. If the child is the child already was ready to come out, then it's like mamash, like a full born, and then we don't say that necessarily the mother died, that the child died before the mother. So therefore, if it's an uber and the child died before the mother, it doesn't pass anything on. So the brothers of a different mother will not inherit anything from this child inside the mother's womb, even though it's their brother, and then the mother died. It won't happen because since the child died before his mother, he will not yashin from his mother to pass it on to his brothers. But if the child came out into this world and he's alive, then his mother died before him, then he yashins his mother, then he will pass it on to his brothers, who even though they have a different mother. My timer, my why to whom is Beresha. Inside the womb will always assume that the Uber died first. And the child inside the mother's womb cannot pass it on to brothers from a different mother. Yeah, says the Gemara. This is very negay about the Gemara. Fascinating about who if you kill one to save the life of the other and all that. That Gemara. Remember to say who might Beresha. You're telling me what? It's a fact that inside the mother's womb, it's always the fetus that dies first, if they both are found dead while giving birth. Then we saw an incident once. We saw it making 3 thrusts. The baby still continued to move. The legs moved or moved. Taisus brings a version. Means 3 parsa. The baby somehow another. I don't know how it crawled for 3 parsa. Or the time it takes to walk 3 parsa, which is 3 hours and a bit, right? 72 minutes is a parsa. So you're talking about 3 hours, 3.5 hours, a little bit more than 3.5 hours. We're still alive, at least moving. Things are moving. So we answered, just like by a lizard, you cut the tail off, it still waggles and everything else. No, but these are nerves. It's nerves. It's not a living thing. Okay, so that's what we have so far. Rav Sheshes holds that an uber is kaina, and you have Rav Nachman that says that uber is only kaina if he said lika shetela. Right now cannot be kaina, but you're saying clearly once you're born, And then you have Rav Huna says in all instances it doesn't work. Mar Bareya, the Rabbi Yisrael Rabba, Mar, he gives a different answer. Mar, the son of Rabbi Yosef, said the name of his teacher Rabba. He said, Loiber, which come to tell you here, Shememayed Bechelik Bechayda. He's coming to tell you, really, could be she dies first. Maybe she died first, and then the Uber died. So the Uber therefore Yashin and Yashin his mother, and it says in Noichul Manchel. You just said that the only reason why it says Yom Echad has been one day born, because if it's inside the mother's womb and the mother, let's say, died first, it cannot pass on. An Uber cannot pass on. And then we said an Uber always dies. We said that that an Uber always dies first, and that's why there's nothing, because it's dead already. He said, no, nothing to do with that at all. Nothing to do with that at all. Maybe Takim could be that she died before him, and then the Uber, and then he does pass on to his brothers, because he outlived his mother, right? So he was alive when the mother passed away. So he does pass his brother. So why does it say Dafke Tinug Yom Echad? Why Dafke to make a bigger chiddush, even if an Uber? He says here, yeah. Now, remember, this is in the name of Rava. Rava before said clearly that that he believes in Uber is not kinda. It's only a weak kinyan by the ger. And now Rava is saying, really, an Uber is kinda. Really, an Uber is kinda. Why is it Yom Echad? We'll give a reason why. So Rashbam says it happens many times in the Gemara that the Gemara sort of to sharpen minds, what you can say an opinion this way with such an definitive, and then a minute later give opinion for Kek. Even though the Gemara clearly said my benayu, the Gemara made a machlek, a chilik and halacha between Abaye and Rava, and then yet the Gemara, the same Rava, comes along on the same sugya and gives an answer completely opposite, as if he's trying to work out in his mind. So which is the right way? So what what he's talking about here? He says he's talking about she'enoi she'mayid b'cheli b'chayda v'dafke ben yom echad. Only a ben yom echad is a mayit chelik b'chayda, and then he dies. I will uber loy, but not even uber. So look, for example, there's two sons. The b'chay gets double portion of the other son, right? So whatever it is. So let's say that the Rambam's example is with 12 fields. The b'chay gets 8, and the Pashat gets 4, because he gets double the other portion. And then what happened was, it was a Levi, a third son. So you have Reuben, Shimon, then you have Levi. And then Reuben died, Yaakov died. And then he died after Levi was born. So Levi now was born, so you have 3 sons. So now what would be the din? So now there's 12 portions of land. So Reuben, you have 3 sons. So Reuben gets, you divide into 4 portions, as if Reuben is 2 people. So you have 4 portions. Each one gets 3, and Reuben gets 6, because Reuben is a b'chayr. There's a chelik pashat and there's a chelik b'chayr. But then what happened was that Levi died on that day. So now for the 3 portions that he has, goes back to these 2 brothers. And here, Reuben does not get a double portion in Levi's share. So Levi had 3 fields. So you don't say, oh, Reuben's a b'chayr, he should get 2 out of those 3 fields, and Shimon gets 1 out of those fields. You don't say that. Because you don't say if you don't say that's what that's what do you call that Dafke if he was born, do we say that the b'chayr does not get a double portion? But if he would have been an Uber, who would have been Yashal 3 fields, and he died, Yaakov died, and then the Uber died. There, the Uber will not be Mamayid the Chelik b'chayr. The b'chayr will get double portion. In other words, when the portion we thought the Uber should be getting, which is 3 fields, now that the Uber died before he came into this world, so they're going to split the Uber's portion. In this case, we say that the b'chayr does get 2 parts, and Shimon only gets 1. If he was born for 5 minutes and then he died, he had a full thing, and now they're no longer yashning from their father; they're yashning from Levi, and there's no b'chayr when it comes to a brother. B'chayr is only in regard to your father, not regard to your brother. So therefore, when it comes to the brothers, 3 fields, each one gets 1.5. But if he was in the stage of an Uber, even though an Uber is kaina, but the Uber never, as far as the b'chayr is concerned, as far as the Yerusha is concerned, the Uber is kaina. As far as the b'chayr is concerned, it doesn't have any bearing at all until the Uber is born. And why is that? Why should it make a difference? My time, the Yolduloi Amarachmana. It says that he has to be born. And since he wasn't born yet, he doesn't have the whole din of Chayr is only those amongst those who were born. And since he wasn't born yet, it's only an Uber, there's no din of Chayr over there. Now, how can he be the Chayr if he? How can there be brothers if he's and he be the Chayr? You're saying that Chayr only is entitled to Chayr. He doesn't get a double portion, only the Chayr. Because we're talking about cases that the Shainim say. We'll talk in a minute. Studying about it further. Ben if a son was born after his father died, my time, why? So if a B'chai was born after his father died, and if a B'chai was born after his father died, how can be other brothers then? How can be any other brothers? If you're telling me that a B'chai was born after, if he was born and then the father died, the B'chai gets a double portion. But if he was born before the father died, he does not get a double portion. How's that possible? If he's the only son anyway, he gets all the portions. What's the difference? So we're talking about either twins were born, so there were two, or he had 5 wives, and they were all pregnant. And he was the first one that came out, but then eventually all the other ones came out as well. So therefore, we're saying over here that there's no din of B'chai. The din of B'chai doesn't happen until you're born. But as far as being kaina, even an Uber is kaina. The Surah Masnahach, that's how they learned in the Surah, but this is Masnahach, but this is a little bit differently. Amamar, Breda, Isa Mashen Rabba, a B'chai shenoiled la'acha misaviv, a B'chai that is born after the father died. So sorry, the first case was not to B'chai. First, we're talking about a Ben. We're talking about a Ben, whether if he died before they actually proportioned everything else, how does it pass on to the brothers? So we said that if he was already born, then the brothers only divide his estate equally. The fact that there's another B'chai, the B'chai doesn't get a double portion of his brother because he's the Yashin from the brother. If he was in the stage of an Uber, then even though an Uber is kind of, but if in the stage of an Uber, the Uber dies after the father, but dies before he was born. Now the brothers are going to divide his estate. In that case, the B'chai will get a double portion. It's only after the Uber is born that the B'chai does not get a double portion. That was the first Marba Rabbi Yosef. The second one is regarding the B'chai himself. First one is regarding a younger brother, how they divide his estate. There's a difference whether the younger brother died while in the stage of an Uber or when the child was born. And now the second case is if the child itself was a B'chai. And how is child B'chai? There were twins, triplets, or there were other women that were pregnant as well. And there's no, if the child itself it died as an Uber, there's no din of B'chai. It has to be born. Ben Shenrei Lachamid, if the child was born after the father died, ain't my B'chai. My time of the Yolder, sorry, I went back a line. This is Masnahachi. This is how I put this. Not a Ben, but a B'chai was born after the father died. Ain't a nice Mishnah. I don't get no portion. My time, the father had to get to know the child. The whole lesson. And in this case, the father doesn't know. The Yakir, there's no Yakir. The father died before the child was born. So there's no din of B'chai. As far as B'chai is concerned, the Torah says Yakir. The Taisa wants to know, you know why before you brought the pasuk of the Yoldu Loi, and here you bring the pasuk Yakir, you could have brought the same pasuk. The Yoldu Loi, that if the Yoldu Loi is born. The difference is what happens if the child was born while the father was a Geisis. So if we would learn the father was dying on a deathbed, the last and Rav Geisis Ilimisim, most of them do not recover. So if we learn from the Yoldu Loi, the child was born, he's entitled to B'chai. But if you learn from Yakir, the father had no ability to get to know the child, so there's no din of B'chai. The halach is like all of these expressions that said name of Rabbi. Now is name Rabbi Yechanan. Just like Abuna, that if you want to acquire on behalf of an Uber, the Uber is not kaina. I've obtained a Mishnah Seinu, clear Mishnah. I gave it to someone else. I want you to acquire for my, if it's a boy 100, for a girl 200. So Rav Huna said, I'm lost. I don't know who the author of the Mishnah is. In time Mishnah Seinu comes along. He says, "Hoyel v'daita shel adam kreve eitzel b'nai." In a case where a stranger is giving a present, you cannot be kind of for an Uber. But where is the father who's in the Mishnah? What's our Mishnah talking about? The father says, if you're a boy, if this child embryo is going to be a boy, I want to have $100. If it's a girl, I want her to have $200. And you want them to have it. So therefore, even though the child in Uber at the stage, it's kind of. Now, why did everyone answer that? So it's very clear from here that they're arguing in what's going on over here. Why Hamazakil Uber Loikana? Abu Huda says, because there's nowhere to who you're working with, there's no one to work with here. So even if you say Likisha Taylor, when you'll be born, but who are you talking to? There's no one here. Rabbi Yechina says, no, an Uber is here. It's inside the mother's womb. If the woman is not pregnant at all, you go to a woman, look, if you take your wife, if you have a child, if you fall pregnant, have a child, I won't give them this and this present, there's nothing to talk to. But there's an Uber here. Uber is Yeshne Ba'ilam. No, the problem is that there's no smichas das, because you don't really know if your child survived. It's not a strong kinyan, just like we said before, the Fuyarafia. And if Rabbi Yechina says, but a father means it. A father really wants the child to have it, and because the father really wants to have the child to have it, he's convinced, he believes that the child will be all right, and therefore he means it. Clear, Rabbi Yechina says the problem is smichas das. Not the problem is nowhere for kinyan to be. So therefore, he holds that it is La'olam. The problem is your kavanah. So a father is different. That one doesn't answer that because he holds the problem is there's no one to talk to. So who cares if you're a father or not a father? The Mishnah, I don't know. He said, I give up. I don't know Pshat the Mishnah. Shmuel once said to Rav Chana from Baghdad, "Puk, go out, Aisli Basra, bring me 10 people." And I want to say to you in front of them, I'm a Zakal Ube Kana. I want to paskin say Shmuel that I'm not like Rabbi Huna and not like Rav Nachman. I want to paskin like Rav Sheshes. That in Mazaka to Nuba you are kind of. Why 10 people? We had in Merksubis and Davzain that Boyaz, he wants to tell the world that Moyavi Veloy Moyavis and all that. He wanted from 10 people that they should know. That when you want to tell the whole world to know a new revolutionary halacha, it's not enough to say to Eidim or even a bezin of free. You want the whole world to know. You get a minion. The hilchos of the halacha is, even though he called 10 people together, Hamazak will be like kana. Then Hamazak is not kind like Rabbi Yechanan and everyone. I would have a guy said to his wife, the chasai lebni the yeveli minach. The guy said to his wife, my assets should be to my son that one day you will have. That one day you'll have. Now she wasn't even pregnant at the time. Nothing. Also, Leah who came along his older son, and he said, "Hey, you're giving everything away to this boy that doesn't even exist." And he spoke about himself in third person. Now, what's going to happen to this older son that you have? You have nothing for him. You know what? This son, I'm talking again third person, he's telling now, you'll be kind of just like that other son that I'm going to have one day. He's convinced he's going to have a son one day, his wife before pregnant, everything else. I want you to be kind of like that person. Now, the problem here is definitely the baby is not kind of, because there's no baby there. Even according to Rabbi Yechanan, a father is close to this, it has to be double b'loilam. Here there's nothing, right? The woman's not even pregnant. But you said to the living son, I want you to be kind of like the son that is not even present in the world. Do we juxtapose the two together and say, well, just like the other one is not kind of, neither are you? Or do we say, you can be kind of, so you'll be kind of, even though the other one is not kind of? How do we interpret, or halachically, what happens in this case? So we say, Hanavada lekanus, in this case, surely nobody's kind of like Katilas Nahai. Sorry? The question is, hi, is Chayla Talia Mokabanya or less than Chayla Talia Mokabanya? Talia is an expression we say when you were young. This living child, does he have, do we say he divides with the part of the child that does non-existent, which means he gets nothing? Or do we say no, that he gets a part, he gets his share because he's a living being and he's able to be kind, and therefore he should be kind. How do we view that? So the question is, does the Talia Interesting expression. Does this Talia get his share of chalapachas because he's shaykh, or do we say because the other one is not shaykh, this one also is not, this one also not kind? Is Rab Avin? We have a big machlekes. Rab Avin, Rab Maisha, Rab Yemi Adam. They all say is chayegul Talia Mokabanya. Even though that the other banya is not going to get anything, but the Talia will get something. In other words, the living boy will get whatever chelik. In other words, when eventually there's more children, and eventually the father dies, and there's a Yerusha, and we're going to divide the Yerusha, this living son will get an extra portion over and above the amount of the Yerusha what the father promised him back then. That's what they hold. But the Rabavu and Chanina Papi and Abitzchak Nafcha, the Amr, they say less Chayil Tayi Mokabanya. Nope, he divides. They all divide Yerusha equally. He doesn't get any extra portion at all. Amalei Rabavu Rabbi Yirmiyah, Rabavu to Rabbi Yirmiyah, tell me, Hilchas Kavos son or Hilchas Kavos Eichel? So who's halacha like us or like you? Sometimes we learned in the past that said the halacha like the other ones, but here he said Rabbi Yirmiyah was like Pshita. Of course, we're the halacha goes. You know why? The kashish no. We're older than you, so therefore you have to respect us and halacha like us. So the Gemara. The lav hichas a kabasai and the law is not like you, the dardike atzen, because you're young. Amalei, so Rabu said back to me, who cares how old or young we are? What does that even mean? But time who makes more sense? So Rabbi said, no time am I. Taka tell me, so what's your svara? Why isn't he kind of? So he says, Zil, so Rabbi didn't want to answer him. He said, you know what? I guess you want to be have a discussion with Rabbi. He said, Zil legabe de Rabavin. Why did you go to Rabavin? The Asbarte Nele, I explained to him already the reason. Could have told him right then and there, but he didn't want to. The Ukachish Baresha. Ben Midrasha. When I sat there and I told him his words, he shook his head, he nodded his head, he agreed with my svara. So he likes it. You want to know the svara? Go talk to him. Ozla Gabe. Rabbi went. Undeterred, he went to Rabavin, asked him, no, what's the reason? Amalei. He said to him, I'll tell you why. Ilu Amalei. Kni kachamor. If he would have said to him, you know what, you be kind of this field, just like a donkey can be kind of. Be kani. Will it be kind of? The Itmar we learned. Kni kachamor like kana. Same with him here. He says, you're kind of just like Zil Kniat together with the future child. So just like the future child, not kind of, you're not kind of either. That's the sort of. What happens if he says, the more digression now, what if he says, at the chamor? You and the donkey should be acquiring my two fields. He didn't say you should be like a donkey. He said you and my donkey. What do we say in that case? Do we say since the donkey cannot be kind nor can you, or do we say it's two separate transactions there? You can and the donkey can't. Rav Nachman Rav Nachman says that you kind of have. In other words, Chamai's share you're not kind of, but you're kind of your share. He said both of you are kind field. Rav Nuna says lo yamaklum. Just like since I partnered you with a donkey and the donkey not shy to be kind of, nor are you. So even in the case of Ve'at, you're not kind of. And Absheish is again, he's Kana Hakel. Since the donkey cannot be kind of, so then you're kind of everything. You're kind of everything. And tomorrow we'll continue to understand this particular new argument that we're discussing.